So tonight we're going to look at really just understanding transferable skills, how they apply to interviewing. We're going to find ways to gain confidence from your experiences. A lot of people think that they don't have worthwhile experience or just don't have the skill set to interview well. But we'll show you the things that you've most certainly done that will help with that. We'll talk about applying and articulating these skills into the 4 phases. So that's anywhere from your first elevator pitch, phone interviews, virtual interviews, especially today. And then, of course, in-person interviews when we get back to those. And then lastly, we'll talk about strategies for developing these skills. So the biggest thing is, your first interview, right? Um, a lot of people think they haven't been on an interview before. But if you guys are in this room right now, you've already done that, right? The reason why, all of you guys went through a recruiting process. Now this presentation is geared towards student athletes, but I will just generalize it as a whole. For our athletes, in the recruiting process, their skills were identified through a coach or recruiting profile. They then watch them at, AU, club, high school. Then they start talking on the phone, they text, social media, they start interacting, networking, right? You might go on an unofficial visit. Next thing you know, you're on an official visit. You get an offer, you're committed. You look at that side by side with the interview process, it's the same. Even if you're not an athlete, you went through a recruiting process, right? The whole college thing is a recruiting process. From the time you take that pre-SAT or PSAT, you start getting all the letters from all the colleges. You go on all the visits, do all the things. That's the same concept. You still have those interviews. You might attend an alumni network night. You might come on a visit on campus. It's the same process. You have the applications. That's like an interview in itself, even though it's more written. But just really thinking about, even if you haven't ever been on a job interview, you've done things that are right in line with, completing an interview. So I always like to ask this question just to see how many I can get right. If I were to ask you, what are your top 3 common transferable skills for Davidson students, what would you put? Again, feel free to come off mute, put it in the chat. But what are the top 3 transferable skills you might think for Davidson students and student athletes?
I think the honor code would maybe transfer to like workplace ethics. And a lot of people don't get that at other schools, and so it's something that we can talk about.
Yeah, that's definitely a good answer. That's actually too good of an answer, Hope, because I did not have that one, but that is definitely something that's unique to Davidson. One of the things we talk about a lot is, how can you separate yourselves from other candidates? So that's definitely a really good answer there. Writing is an answer, so that's definitely a skill that we all have. Any others? All right. Well, these are my top 3, and you guys are a tough crowd because usually I get a lot of these right, at least 2 out of 3. But when we think about common transferable skills for Davidson students, leadership is one. Um, you guys wouldn't be here if you didn't have leadership attributes. Time management is another. Whether you're working a job, you're working on an independent research project, you're with the gig hub, you're an athlete. School and sleep alone is enough, but everyone on this campus is involved with something else as well. So just managing all those items and doing it well, right? Having a solid GPA, contributing and earning of those accolades. And the last one's teamwork. Again, obviously that's obvious if you're an athlete, but again, there's a lot of group projects, there's a lot of collaborative environments within campus. So everyone is contributing to teamwork in some aspect. Those are transferable skills. Those are common. So if I were to ask you, what are some of the more unique ones? What might you say? Anyone? Yeah. Foreign language. It's definitely a unique skill. Also very handy on the resume.
Different coding languages.
Yeah. So that's definitely a good one as well. Man, you guys are tough. Tough. Those are good answers. but not the ones I had. Um, when I think about unique transferable skills, again, that could be failure, right? Failure is a skill in a sense. How do you respond? That's going to be something you get a lot in interview questions. Are questions where they ask you one thing, but really they're just looking to see how you respond, how you recovered, what your reaction was to that. Preparation. Everyone's preparing for something. Again, whether it's a sport, whether it's your classes, whether it's independent research. Adversity. A lot of people go through adversity. How do you respond from it? How do you come out stronger? What do you do with that to learn from that experience? Those are all things that employers are going to look for. They may not ask it directly, but they're looking for it. All right. So a couple common myths. I hear these all the time. I heard it actually just today. I heard a couple of these. Had four appointments with first year resumes. I don't have anything worth. Well, I haven't done anything worth putting on my resume. If you didn't have anything worth putting on your resume, again, you probably wouldn't be here. Davidson is a fairly selective school. You have to have things worthwhile putting on. It's more just how do you transfer that? How do you take that from high school activities or even college activities, and how do you make that transfer into the professional world? I don't have time to do things outside of my sport or my extracurriculars. Those in themselves are very valuable. Even you think about an eating house, all the things that come out of that, or again, just leadership within your student orgs, your sports, etc. My athletic experience doesn't really help. I couldn't be farther from the truth. I have a whole 30-minute workshop that specifically talks about how your athletic experience can be utilized on your resume and in this process. Or my only work experience is coaching or working at summer camps, which doesn't even count. My first three jobs, I worked at a gas station, I coached camps, and I watched let dogs out, dog walker. You know, Pretty basic things. When you're a first year, or even for sophomores right now, no one expects you to have anything more than just something to make money. And last summer, as we know, is very difficult for a lot of internships and other things. But there's other things we can do to combat that. But again, these are four common myths. I hear them a lot, but I almost guarantee you, if you give me 30 minutes, I can prove you that you have things that we can apply. So we look at, and I'm not going to read all these because I don't want to, bore you guys. But when you think about translating your experience, what does that mean? So, all these things have one common factor. It's when you think about, think about this. If you're working at, say you own your own landscaping business, right? Basically, you cut grass growing up, and that was your summer job. Your skills aren't how good you can cut grass, or how many clients you can service necessarily. Your skills are, you had communication skills. First, to get started, you had to have marketing skills, right? You had to get your product out. You had to let people know you're offering a service. Once you have clients, you have to retain them, right? You don't want to have new clients all the time. You want to have the same customer base and build it. And then obviously, you have to communicate. You have to be on time. You have to do all those things. So something as simple as cutting grass, there's a lot of skills that have nothing to do with grass, right? All these skills, when we talk about transferring your experiences, that's what we want to think about, is what have I done? Not necessarily what have I done, but what are the skills that I'm gaining from what I've done? So obviously there's a lot of leadership opportunities on campus, but even thinking more specifically than that, right? It's, maybe I'm not just a team captain, but what have you done with that? So a lot of this is just, when you think about the interview process, it's just going down the line and thinking of, okay, if I'm saying I have time management skills, if I'm saying that I have communication skills, what are 2 to 3 examples of those? And how can I weave those into the other questions? So now we get into the actual process. You've submitted after your application. You've done everything you feel like you can do. We're in the waiting process. So before the interview, biggest thing is reach out to your network before and after you apply. Let people know what you're doing. You don't always have to ask for something, but if you're working with people who have connections, just telling them might trigger them to say, oh, well, I'll let so-and-so know, or, oh, that's good to know. I'll keep an eye out, or, I'll put in a good word. When I applied to this job, ironically, I work with career development, right? This was the first job I applied for blindly. Didn't know a single person here. But my boss at my old school, who was actually the reason she moved to UNC Charlotte, and she wanted me to come with her. So I was looking for a job there. I happened to find this one, which ended up being a heck of a lot better. Um, I found that just from her. But the point is, I didn't know anyone at Davidson. But she wrote a letter for me. She wrote an email for me just on my behalf. So even if you don't know someone, have someone reach out for you. Now, you don't want to ask like 10 people because that's obnoxious, but if you get one person, to put in a voice of support, that's going to be helpful. The other thing is, again, this was my first job that I didn't know someone. So for me, this is my 5th job. So I'm right in that statistic, right? About 80% of my jobs, I knew someone. Twice, I knew about a job coming open before it even came open. And that's all through my network. So that's what you guys want to start building. You want to think about even just who your friends are here and 10 years from now, where they're going to be, where you're going to be, who you can hire from who's here now. There's a lot of that goes around. I work with a lot of alumni, and you'd be amazed how many people work together or how many people went separate ways for 10 years and then are reconnected. So the Davidson network is really powerful, and you hear that all the time, but it truly is. The next thing is, depending on the circumstances, notify the hiring manager or the recruiter of your application. Again, before they even start looking, just send an email if you know who the hiring manager is. That being said, it's not always easy, right? If you're applying to a giant corporation, you basically just throw your name in the hat on a handshake application. You don't have a clue who the recruiter is. There's not much you can do other than, make sure your resume is good, try and make sure it matches the job description so you can get to that first level. But if you're applying to somewhere where there's Davidson alumni, or a smaller organization where you can see their whole organizational chart online, you can figure out who the hiring manager is. Just send them an email, just something as simple as, "Hi, my name's Josh King. I just submitted my application. I'm really excited for this opportunity, and I look forward to to talking with you soon." You can sell a little bit of a skill or whatever. A lot of times things are just about timing. Um, Again, I don't want to talk about myself the whole time, but just to make it relatable, right? When I applied here, I applied at like 11:30 at night. I didn't know the job closed at midnight. So when I sent an email at 11:30 at night, the next morning, Jamie, who's now my boss, was going to look at, her email, which she's about to start looking at applications. She just happened to see my email. So my name's already on her mind when she starts to go through his applications. When you have 80 to 100 applications for a job, that can be worth a little something, right? The other part is it's never going to hurt. So no one's ever going to be like, "Oh my God, they applied and sent me a note. I can't believe it," right? It's never going to hurt you. May not help, isn't going to hurt. Next part's do your homework. Be prepared. Know the job description. This is basically an outline, a cheat sheet of the interview in the sense of you want to know exactly what the job is so that you can tailor all of your examples to that. Anytime I apply for a job and I go into that interview process, I literally take that job description, if there is one, and think of 2 to 3 examples of every single thing on there, whether it's time management, whether it's advising students, whether it's working in leadership, committees, whatever I can do. So that way, even when you're answering questions, they may not ask you a question about a time where you were a leader, but that's something valuable. So you can weave that into your answer. And then you're answering 2 things at one time. You're answering what they want, but you're also giving them other things that are related to their mission, related to the position. Any questions with that, or we feel pretty good with that? Next part. I almost guarantee that you're going to get this on every single interview you ever have. I've probably sat on close to 100 interviews. I've been on a number of hiring committees. Obviously, myself have interviewed for a number of jobs. I don't know many that start without this. Even if you're in the third level or third, interview of a process, you're probably going to get this because there's going to be new people in the room that you weren't with prior. So you have to have this right. It's about you, right? You can't get that wrong. The biggest thing with this, though, is as simple as it seems, it's not easy. It's something that requires practice. Pretty much with anything that you do in this process, you want to have said it out loud. If I'm going through a process, I might be walking down the street, driving in my car. I'm thinking about it and I'm saying it out loud so that by the time I get to the interview, I've gone through this 10, 15 times for every question I think might be answered. That might sound crazy, but you'll feel so much more comfortable. And if you freeze up or, you forget what you're going to say, it's natural, right? It's not rehearsed. It's just natural because you've said it 20 different ways. You'll start to figure out what you like, what you don't like. I don't know if there's any part of this process where that's more important than your about me. If you're an athlete or if you're, whatever you are, if you're an organization, if you're interested in research, if you do your own coding, just find ways to think about your Davidson experience, weave that into your pitch. Be passionate, have high energy, like show that you care. That's especially important on Zoom. Zoom is really hard to deal with. And I even catch myself sometimes, like when I do these sessions and I go back and watch it to put it on YouTube for our careers channel, I'm like, man, like I just didn't have it. Or, man, that's just boring. Who wants to listen to that? A big thing just for Zoom specifically is change your pitch, make eye contact with the camera. You don't have to stare at it the whole time like this, but you don't want to be like reading your screen and then all they're seeing is the side of your face. So think about the eyes of the camera, or the eyes of the employer are the camera for virtual. But again, be passionate, have high energy. Even if what you have to offer isn't as good, they're just going to feel that. They're going to feel that excitement. And that carries a lot of weight. So when we talk about the about me, what's the formula? There's no right or wrong answer. This is what I like. What I like may be different from what other people like. It may be different from what you think. If there's one thing about the career process, I hate when I hear people say, well, that's wrong or that's stupid or, whatever. It's an opinion thing. There are certainly industry standards. There are different, protocols for different jobs, but it's a very open thing, right? It's definitely based on personal preference. So you want to understand what is common for your industry, but you also just want to believe in what you're doing. So, be comfortable with what you're doing. For the about me, I like to keep it short and sweet. It's your first pitch. You want to come out strong. But what happens is you have those butterflies, right? You're a little nervous as the first piece. Sometimes what that turns into is you're nervous, you haven't practiced, you think, oh, it's about me. Like, how hard could it be? And all of a sudden you're rambling, and 3 minutes later, you're halfway into a story that no one cares about any longer. I say that from personal experience, you're about me. You want to keep it short and sweet, right to the point. Different people have different opinions on this. They're going to have seen your resume. They're going to know this stuff. So some people might say, you don't need to say your year, major sport. I like to because it makes me comfortable, right? It's an easy, let me get going. It takes 3 seconds. So that's kind of my thought. Provide your passion. What's your why? Like, why are you applying for this job? The last thing you want to do is recite your resume. They already know that. That's why you got an interview. So you don't have to talk about that. You want to talk about why you're excited. Maybe point out a particular skill, maybe cite a specific example. The biggest thing is if you have connections or you've done your research on the people in the room, find something that's going to get them engaged, right? So if you play baseball and your interviewer played baseball, say something that triggers that. Say something that gets them engaged, gets them comfortable. You're nervous when you start. I'm not going to say people on the other side are nervous, but you have to ease into it, right? It's kind of awkward at first. It just is, but you'll get used to it. The last thing is state why the position excites you. That's what you want to end your pitch on. So just for an example, if I were giving my pitch for the position I'm in, it would go something like, hi, my name's Josh King. I'm the assistant director for athlete career development here at Davidson College. I've been really fortunate to work with a lot of different athletes and a lot of different sports. I had the opportunity to engage with alumni, and I really like to learn. I really like to serve my students. I really enjoy seeing them grow over a 4-year period. And I'm really excited for this job because it's going to allow me to practice all those skills, and that which will really help your organization with my expertise. Simple, clean, I just did that on the fly, but I mean, it's basic, right? That's a pretty good, simple introduction. The other thing you want to do is if you can create conversation after this, do it. So I was watching a show on HBO, or just started watching a show on HBO called Industry. It's about interning in investment banking. Since I'm working with the banking and finance now, I thought it might be interesting. Definitely a lot of Hollywood, but I saw a piece in there that I thought was really interesting, and it's definitely true. So they were teaching one of the new interns how to talk to clients. And I was talking about this the other day and I completely forgot what it's called, but you know, like you get the little sand timer for games and stuff. She said, take the sand timer. Once you hit the call, flip it. Don't talk about business until the time is run out. So really just think about that, right? Like the best way to get comfortable with the situation, don't necessarily talk about what you're there for. Find that small talk. That goes back to research. Look up LinkedIn, look where they went to school, look what they're involved in, find those similarities and embrace that. That can come before you're about me, that can come after. Um, Obviously, you want to feel comfortable, so you don't want to just start spouting off random stuff. But if it feels comfortable within the flow of an interview, the best interviews are conversations. They're not Q&As. Does that make sense? All right. So all that being said, we're going to talk about articulating your skills. So this is an example. I am leader. So I didn't even do that right. I'm a leader because I'm a team captain on my college team. Is this good? Pretty boring, right? I mean, yeah, maybe you are, but I mean, there's, hundreds of colleges and hundreds of teams. There's hundreds of high schools. A lot of people could have a boring line like that. Instead, think about, I've developed leadership skills over the past 4 years as a student athlete by serving as team captain and taking advantage of the opportunity to develop and mentor our younger student athletes on and off the field. I've also served as vice president on the SAC committee and am active in the pre-law club on campus. So one's just telling you they're a leader because of a status. One is showing you they're a leader because of their actions. So really just think about that, because especially when you're in your first couple of interviews and you're not as experienced, it's really easy to be vague. But you want to give examples. You want to show people your skills. You want to show people what you've done. You don't want to just tell them and hope that they assume that that's true. So the second one here, I developed time management skills because I'm a student athlete and I have a lot on my plate. Again, there's close to 1 million athletes, college athletes in this country. There's a lot of people that work 40 hours a week and still go to school full time. There's people that do both. I don't know if you guys follow, but Oklahoma State has a walk-on in their basketball team who just got a scholarship, worked at Walmart 40 hours a week, played college basketball, went to school. I was especially drawn to that because Mike Boynton, who's their head coach, he was one of my mentors growing up. He coached at my college. So instead of saying something basic like that really doesn't tell you a whole lot, show them how you manage those time management skills. So something like, I've mastered my time management skills by using my Outlook calendar and iPhone reminders to keep track of my schedule. I have to stay organized to balance my responsibilities, which include 20 hours of practice and film per week, team travel, a full course load of 15 credit hours, and I also volunteer 2 to 3 times per month at the local pet shelter. The other thing with that too is show personality, like show other things. They're going to hear a lot of vanilla answers. Throw things in there that are unique to you, but also show something that you're passionate about, so your interest. But again, just show you as a holistic person. Those are little things that it may not have anything to do with the job. They're like, oh, you remember that girl that, she volunteers at the pet shelter? That's really cool because I do that. I'd love to have someone who is interested in that as well. Just little things like that. But do we see there just the difference in those two statements and how the second one in both cases is so much stronger? Phone interviews, the most awkward part of any interview process. It really is. Maybe now with Zoom being more popular, maybe that's more awkward. I've actually never done a Zoom interview, so I don't know from personal experience, but I do know phone interviews are awkward. The biggest thing is just like you're about me, speak confidently with enthusiasm. All they have is your voice, right? So they don't want to hear someone who's boring or doesn't sound sure. Confidence, enthusiasm, again, it doesn't matter as much what you say. Sometimes it's how you say it. It's just showing that passion, showing that energy. Be proactive, not reactive. What does that mean? Again, do your research, right? Know what you're talking about. Know what the job looks like. Know things about the company. Sometimes try to share those. You don't want to share too much without being asked, but if you know that, you've read their mission statement and you know their 4 core values are X, Y, Z, A, because I said 4, you know what their 4 core values are. Try and find ways, maybe 2 of those align with your personal core values. Find ways to, weave those in to integrate that. So it just kind of shows that you're ready for the job. That's being proactive, not reactive. The other things, scout your committee. Very often, maybe not as much for a phone interview, but typically in an in-person interview, you're going to get a list or a timeline, an itinerary of who you're meeting with. This is a great chance to go on LinkedIn and figure out who these people are. Go on the company website, figure out where they've been, what their title is, what projects they work on. Fun fact, if you're on LinkedIn and you feel really awkward about this, you can change your privacy settings so that they can't see who you are searching. Now, it's not the worst thing necessarily to let them see you looking them up. It just shows that you're doing your research. But, different people feel differently. Know the job. Know the job. Look at the job description, talk to people in the industry, talk to alumni that are there, talk to your fellow, students who have maybe interviewed here before, maybe are a year older. Get their understanding of the process, but know the job. I've already said it 20 times, have examples prepared. If you take one thing away from this session, it's I'm going to have examples prepared, because that is single-handedly what will separate you from other people. For some people, setting up will always be somewhere comfortable in a professional space. That being said, honestly, I've had to do interviews from my car because it was the only place that I could get away for and I knew it would be quiet. I've done as much as drive to an empty parking lot to do a phone interview when I couldn't get to a better space. But if you can, get a space. If you're doing interviews on campus, you can email us at careers@davidson.edu and reserve our conference room. We, during the year, we usually offer rooms, but even with COVID times, we're not there. We can set that up for you. So definitely feel like if you don't want to interview in your room, that's understandable, especially for video. You can also go to the hub when they're open, they have spaces you can do interviews as well. For some people, dress professionally. For me personally, this might not make as big of a difference. I'm pretty locked in when I get to this stage, but for some people, just having the mindset of, I don't want to be in sweatpants and a t-shirt. I want to be, in a dress shirt and khakis, because that's going to make me feel more prepared. So that's a you thing. Just figure out what makes you feel more prepared. Last thing is, and I know maybe aging myself a little bit, but just find your happy place. In all seriousness, before I go into an interview, I try to watch a funny video, or just think about something that makes me laugh, because it just makes me happier. And then I just feel more relaxed. So as simple as that may sound, as dumb as it may sound, I don't know. That's what helps me. It's all about getting comfortable. In-person interviews, dress appropriately. If you don't know what that means, always go up a level. Obviously, when I was interviewing at a gas station, I probably wasn't wearing a full suit. But if you're just not sure, just go up a level. Again, talk to people in industry, find out what the standard is, talk to your classmates, see what they've done, or obviously talk to us. We would be happy to help identify that. Plan to arrive early, but please, dear God, don't go into the interview too early. All right. What do I mean by this? 15 minutes is acceptable. Anything beyond that can be really awkward for an employer. When we were hiring one of our new positions in January, and I will say it's not one of the people that we hired, had a guy show up an hour early. We still had other candidates in the building. And that's really awkward when you're like, okay, now I have to kill an hour entertaining you, or, you feel awkward as the host, like, well, I don't want to make them sit out there for an hour. Please just show up and sit in the parking garage, or if it's a big building and you don't know where the heck you're going, just find your place. And then, again, I think for me professionally, 5 to 15 minutes is good. I'll try to get in there about 10 minutes early if it's me. But yeah, just don't be too early. Have great posture, positive body language. Really think about this. If you're not sure what yours is like, Zoom's the easiest way to find out. Learned that in a public speaking class my freshman year. Basically said, before you practice every speech, record yourself. Figure out what are your, like, do you touch your face when you get nervous? Do you move your hands too much? Are you slouching over? I was doing a mock interview a couple months ago, and I saw this, and I couldn't figure out what was going on till I realized she was standing up and she was swaying. And, that's one of those things, just with video, be really cognizant of that. Obviously, we're talking about in-person interviews here, but still be cognizant of what are you doing. That's again something we're happy to help with those mock interviews to identify those. Use your phone interview as an exhibition. Always be learning, right? So there's times where you might get from phone interview to in person, but you're like, man, that third question, I really botched that. Take that home, figure out what you can do to improve with it, and find a way to not necessarily outright address it, but find ways to subtly cover up and fix what you maybe didn't think you answered well. The other thing is you're gonna learn from that. You know, what questions they ask. Based on those questions, what do you think they're gonna ask next? You know, when you're in your phone interview, I didn't touch on it yet, but you're going to get a chance to ask questions. Already be thinking about what are questions that A are going to help me? What are questions that B, the employer may want to hear? Good, solid questions. But the biggest thing is, how can I use that to help me for when I get to the next level? Again, it's not going to be a direct, oh, so like, what do you guys want to do for the in person interview? Like, what questions will I ask there? Obviously, not that. But something, just simple questions that you think might help. Again, be confident, practice, but don't recite. Reciting is like the worst thing you can do because that's when you freeze up. If everything's natural, you're not going to freeze up. It's just natural. You might slow down or hit a bump, but you're going to catch yourself a lot quicker. Again, and I'm being serious when I say this, for me personally, and for a lot of people I've worked with, just saying it out loud helps. Anticipate questions, anticipate counter questions, and just practice those out loud. Practice with a friend. Like I said, obviously we do mock interviews. We do them over Zoom. For all of our sophomores, juniors, seniors, I'm not going to give away yet, but we are going to have a contest coming up, and mock interviews will be part of that. So definitely keep your eyes peeled for over the next week on our Instagram. And again, I feel like I've beat a dead horse at this point, but examples. That's what sells you. And again, this is also true for the phone interview. Obviously important for the in-person interview. Have 5 to 8 questions ready for your interviewer. You might say, well, that sounds like a lot. Yeah, because sometimes your questions get answered in the course of an interview. And what's worse than you get to the end and you had 3 questions and they've all been answered and now you're froze. So, have those questions ready. Depending on your interview, some of you guys might be going in and it's a 30-minute, one-person, in-person interview, in and out. I've been on interviews where they were a day and a half. I've been on interviews where they were 4 hours meeting with 8 people, 30. It's okay to take notes. It's okay to make notes, so don't feel awkward about that. You don't want to be sitting there reading your questions off as they, during the interview, but, keep quick notes so that, maybe you're taking notes during the interview, or maybe you're in the 3rd interview of 4 in a row. Before you step in there, just look real quick, just so you can remember, who am I talking to? What's their top 3 things I need to remember? What are the questions I want to ask this person? Any questions on that? Because I know I've been talking a lot. All righty. We are almost done, so just bear with me. Virtual interviews. It's everything I've talked about, and I've even given out some freebies already about virtual interviewing. But again, set up in a professional space, think about what's my background. Again, I was doing a mock interview and someone had a bottle of tequila right in the camera. Do people drink out, not at work, but in work functions? Sure. People drink? Sure. Do you want a bottle of tequila in your background on a phone interview or a virtual interview? No. So think about what's in your background. Again, we have spaces to help with that. Is your internet stable? There's nothing more terrifying than your internet cutting out. So make sure if you can use a landline, please do. If you can't, that's fine, but make sure you're somewhere stable. Also, is it a quiet space? Again, just things to think about. I already talked about this, but again, is the camera angle good? Can they see my hands? If you like to use your hands, make sure they're visible. Because I've seen people do this where they're moving their hands and they feel like it's visible, but I'm just sitting here looking at you the whole time and you only see from here up. So just really think about all of those things. Again, I already mentioned sit down. Eye contact, look at the camera. You don't need to stare at the camera the whole time. You wouldn't stare someone dead in the eye for a 30-minute interview, but you just don't want to be looking off to the side all the time. So just really pretend that the green light is a pair of eyes. Another really important thing, be cognizant that you're enunciating your words even more so than normal. You never know if their internet's lagging, maybe your internet's lagging and they can't hear you as well. Just really focus on speaking clearly. Obviously, you should always do this. It's just amplified with Zoom. The other thing with lag is give an extra 2 to 3 seconds between. You don't want to accidentally cut somebody off because there's internet lag. 2 to 3 seconds of pause isn't going to kill you, but just really try to give that extra time to make sure you don't accidentally cut off an interviewer. So I talked about questions to ask employers. Ask questions that show your knowledge. They show your research. Again, help you learn more about the company. Obviously, we want to do that for the next interview, for all that. But honestly, interviews are a two-way street. It's not just, are you good enough for the employer? It's also, is this somewhere that I actually want to work? Maybe the job on paper sounds like a dream, but the work environment's terrible. You don't want to go somewhere like that, So is it a good fit for you? Setup questions, my personal specialty / favorite. Setup questions are when you ask a question, knowing pretty much what they're going to say, but you just want to ask a question so they give an answer so that you can respond to that. So in other words, maybe you have a really cool experience doing a study abroad that you haven't had a chance to talk about in the interview, but it's related to this, internship because it involves, speaking Spanish or some sort of language skill, right? Well, you could just ask a question, something as simple as, in this job, do we get to travel, or is travel a part of this? Or if travel is a part of it, where are some of the places you've gone with your travel? And then they're going to give you an answer. And then you can say, oh, that's really cool because I actually had a chance as a junior to go to, I'll just talk about mine. So when I was a freshman, I got to go to Ecuador. And it was really cool because we got to help build houses and we got to see the Galapagos Islands and blah, blah, blah. And then obviously, too, you want to put in a fact that's relative to the job. But that's a setup question, right? It's asking a question to get a response so that you can give an answer that you want to give without just saying it outright. Last question you want to ask, I'd say 60, 70% of the time in my experience, people are going to tell you the timeline process. You sure as heck don't want that to be your first question. Please don't let that be your first question. Ask good questions first. That is a fair question. If you really feel like it's wrapping up and you're about to walk out the door and they're not saying anything, it's definitely an appropriate question, but it should never be your only question and you don't want it to be your first. That's the last one you want to ask in terms of like literally the last question that you want to ask. Post interviews, send a thank you. Again, back in the day, before my time, people sent these by hand, send them in the mail. That's not as quite the process anymore. You never know. Sometimes there might be 4 interviews over 2 days, and as soon as you leave, you're the 4th interview, or they're making a decision. So always send a thank you. Heck, half the time I've sent mine sitting at the airport after leaving the interview, getting ready to go back home. Another thing, this is personal preference. I like to send individual emails. So if I met with 12 people, I'm sending 12 emails. It's not going to be the same email either. It might be a base, but try and throw in a piece of your conversation that you have with that person to make them really feel like, oh, like you remembered our conversation, or like, oh, you really did enjoy that. You're not just saying it because it's protocol. The other thing is, and the last thing is, self-evaluate within 24 hours and then forget about it. All right. Especially if it's not the final interview. If it's, not the final interview, you want to be prepping for the next round. So again, what did you do well? What didn't you do well? What can you do better for the next one? If it is the final interview, definitely just think about what you can have done better for next time, but don't dwell on it. I once had to wait 2.5 weeks after a final interview to find out if I got a job or not because of an HR issue. I was sweating bullets. I'm not going to lie. It was not fun, but you just have to be patient and understand there's always a process. You never know what's behind it. That was also my first job. So I was really new to that and it was not fun, but the longer you go on, you start to understand, especially once you get to be on the hiring side, you understand all the nuances that go behind some of that stuff. You can reach out if it's been a while. You want to give it, depending on the timeline they give you, you want to give them plenty of time, but there are ways to reach out. That's also something we can help with on an individual basis. And the last piece is, you've been through the process, you've gotten an offer. How do you accept it? Never feel rushed. Take your time. Especially with Davidson jobs, we don't want our employers making you make decisions really with like in less than 2 weeks, depending on the industry, or especially like they should at least give you a week. You don't always necessarily want to, even if you know you're going to take a job, you don't necessarily want to offer, take it on the spot saying, I'm really excited for this opportunity. I need to talk to my family. I need to talk to whoever. That gives you time to evaluate. You don't want to make an emotional decision. It also gives you time to negotiate, right? So maybe they offer you X amount of dollars, but you've done your research and you really think it's worth more. If if you accept on the spot, you've lost your chance to negotiate. If you go home, take some time, think about it, send an email, just say, I really appreciate this offer. I really feel that I'd like to get a little bit better offer. Obviously, better language. We'd talk about how to write that email. Sometimes you can't negotiate salary because it's a budget thing. Other things you can negotiate though are vacation time. A lot of institutions are pretty standard. Davidson, you get 20 days a year. It's not going to change for anyone. But something that you can negotiate here is professional development. Like I want to be able to go to conferences once a year, or I want to have opportunities to improve myself. Those are questions you can ask in an interview as well as, do you have opportunities for professional development that are paid? Other thing is work-life balance. At some point you might have kids and responsibilities like that. And it's really important for you to be able to work from home like we do now, or it's really important for you that I have to be out by 5. So those are things you can negotiate as well. Last thing is, once you commit, please stay committed. There are some exceptions where that's reasonable to renege on an acceptance, but it's really just best practice to be sure. And that's why you don't want to take that acceptance on the spot. You want to give yourself some time to really think about it. The biggest reason is because someday you might apply for a job later. And if you've accepted a job before, ended up reneging for no good reason, they're going to remember that. Depending what industry you're in, it's a small world. So that could get around as well. So once you commit, stay committed. If you're ever in a situation where you can't, just let us know. We're happy to walk through those.